You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another Top 10 list and another Go Nagai video. Been a minute since I've done a Go Nagai video. I think I've done a Top 10 list fairly recently, but so let's jump into it. Today, as you can see by the title, we'll be talking about which 10 Go Nagai mangas I think most deserve a US release. Keep in mind there's plenty of other Go Nagai mangas I think do deserve a US release and need one. But these are the 10 here that currently have not received an English release that I would love to see released in English officially. Some of these I have read via manga apps. Some of them I own, even though they're only in Japanese. But yeah, let's jump into this. So at number 10, we have Demon Lord Dante. Now, Demon Lord Dante was the prototype to Devilman, and the original version of Demon Lord Dante didn't really have a proper ending, as is my understanding. And then later, Go Nagai released Shin Demon Lord Dante, which did have a proper ending that was based somewhat on the anime ending. Again, from what I understand, I haven't actually read that in its entirety. I've only read a couple of chapters of Demon Lord Dante, but I have watched the anime. Demon Lord Dante, if you don't know, is the prototype to Devilman. It was released a year before Devilman was created, and Devilman was actually made to be a more anime-adaptable version of Demon Lord Dante, because they didn't think that Demon Lord Dante was, like, a good enough protagonist because he was too much of, like, a monster, so they wanted to make him more human, so Go Nagai created Akira. Interesting whole thing with that, but, Demon Lord Dante is still pretty decent in and of itself. It's definitely not as good as Devilman, and in my opinion, the second half of it is not as good as the first half of it, based on the anime. But it's still a really good series, and I hope that the manga at some point gets a US release, probably by 7 Seas. In fact, I would say the vast majority of these, the most likely company to release them would probably be 7 Seas. Alright, on to number 9, we have Gekki Man. So, Gekki Man is a fictional autobiography of sorts of Go Nagai that explains, like, the story of him writing Devilman and then later Mazinger Z. I haven't actually read a ton of it myself, but I am vaguely familiar with it, and I do know that it has a lot of very fictionalized things in it, and in fact, even though it's about Go Nagai, the character is a fictionalized version named Gekki Nagai, hence the name Gekki Man. And then the first like volume of it is based on creating Devilman, and the second volume is based on creating Mazinger Z. I'd love to see that released here because it's like this weird quasi-biopic sort of thing that's heavily fictionalized. So I'd love to see that get an official US release as well. Alright, number 8, we have Keiko Kamen. Now, Keiko Kamen, I have watched some of the anime, and I've read a little bit of the manga on manga apps. The anime was only 4 episodes long. I've only seen one of the 4. Although I do own this set. It was a 4-episode OVA series. I do own the set, and I have watched 1 episode. But Keiko Kamen was written sort of as a joke. Go Nagai literally sent it in to his publisher as a joke, saying, you know, look how stupid this is. And they said, no, we love this, let's publish it. And so he wrote a whole manga based on it. Keiko Kamen is a very tongue-in-cheek parody, sort of several different masked hero animes and mangas and tokatsus, or whatever, however you say that live-action show one. So it's a parody of things like that. It's a parody of things like Kamen Rider, Silver Mask, and Tiger Mask, things like that. Like it's very much a parody of like the masked hero genre, but instead of just being a masked hero, it's a hero whose face is covered, but her body is completely exposed. She has no costume other than a mask that covers her face and a scarf. Other than that, she's pretty much completely nude. It actually has a lot of similarities with Abashiri Family in that it takes place at like this evil school where the principal is like this bad guy named the Great Toenail of Satan, tortures the students, and the students constantly get punished in like really rapey ways, very similar to Abashiri Family, at least based on the OVA of Abashiri Family. So very similar there, and there's a lot of like callbacks to other stuff as well, as there always is with Go Nagai. But I'd love to see this one, even though it was kind of made as a gag. I enjoyed what I've read of it. It's interesting enough. Alright, number 7, we have Harenshigakuen. Now, this was one of Go Nagai's more controversial works. Harenshigakuen, or Shameless School, as it translates to, is basically just a bunch of ecchi fan service. I don't really know a whole lot about the plot of it, because not very much of it is really talked about in the US. I do know that he wrote a fake ending to it, where he brutally had the PTA murdered, in response to a bunch of PTA complaints he was getting about it being, like, too graphic, even though it's actually relatively tame by today's standards. But yeah, he had an ending where he just intentionally made everybody die and killed off the PTA, just as kind of a fuck you to the people who were talking bad about him, and then later on he wrote the real ending. But Harenshigakuen did introduce us to a lot of characters that would become mainstays. I think Goemon got his start in Harenshigakuen. I could be wrong on that. It might have been... I also can't remember if Abashiri Family or Harenshigakuen came first. Let me actually check that. Okay, doing a quick fact check, Harenshigakuen definitely predates Abashiri Family. So again, if I'm not mistaken, Goemon did get his start in Harenshigakuen, but I could be wrong on that. Again, not a whole lot I really know about this one, but because it was one of Go Nagai's most influential works in Japan, and it did kind of like define the ecchi genre, because Go Nagai's just good at defining genres for whatever reason. He was one of the biggest influences over there. So because of that, I think it's significant enough historically that it should get a US release. But moving on to number 6, we have Dora Ron and Maccoon. Now, if you remember, I also put Dora Ron and Maccoon, the original series, as an anime I think that Discotek should license. Well, I think the manga should be licensed by 7 Seas as well. Dora Ron and Maccoon is another one of Go Nagai's demon anime, with this one being about the Prince of Hell, Enma, who runs a detective agency where he hunts demons. With Dora Ron and Maccoon, I have seen, a couple of the adaptations that did get released over here. I've seen Demon Prince Enma and Dora Ron and Maccoon Mera Mera. It's a very goofy, wacky, very Go Nagai type series that's filled with a lot of ecchi elements as well, and it's very awkward and kind of weird, but it's fun. It's very lighthearted, and it has some violence in it too, obviously. But it's one of his lesser-known demon series, at least in the West. I feel like it's a little bit more well-known than some of the crazier stuff out there, but I'd say it's lesser-known than a lot more of his well-known series. But I really do hope Dora Ron and Maccoon does get a US release as well. Alright, at number 5, we have Devilman Lady and Devilman Saga. I combined them both into one entry just because I didn't want to take up 2 entries with both of them, because I wanted the other stuff to be on this list as well. But Devilman Lady and Devilman Saga are the 2 canon sequels to Devilman. Devilman Lady following up after Devilman, and Devilman Saga following up after Devilman Lady. Devilman Lady I've read all the way through on manga apps, and I love the vast majority of it. The final chapter is very disappointing, the ending is terrible, but I do think overall the series does stand pretty well, and I do like some of the stuff they implemented in it. It's also borderline hentai, if not straight up hentai, so there is that too. There's a lot of scenes that I would classify as legitimate 100% hentai, but for whatever reason it's not classified as hentai by a lot of people, even though it totally is. Because I'd argue Devilman Lady is even more sexually explicit than Violence Jack, and Violence Jack was already fairly sexually explicit. So Devilman Lady amps that up to 11. But Devilman Saga I've read the first 43 chapters of, and I've liked it pretty well as well. I like that Akira is once again the main character, although with a different name, rather than June being the main character. Don't get me wrong, I like June, but I'm glad that Akira came back as the main character, again, with a different name now, but it's very clearly Akira. And he's married to Miki in this continuity, so that's pretty cool. But again, I've only been able to read up to chapter 43, so I don't know how it ends, whether or not it has a good ending. But Devilman Saga and Devilman Lady both actually do kind of unique things with the demons. In Devilman Lady, the demons themselves are implied to be mutations rather than actual demons. Of course, later on it turns out that the demons are in fact demons, and the mutation thing was just in a way that they implemented it originally. But then later on they find out that it is in fact still demons, it's just the mutation was a way they were getting onto Earth when June falls into hell and all this other stuff. Because again, Devilman Lady, I'm fairly certain, was originally just supposed to be a self-contained standalone series, but then Go Nagai halfway through decided to make it into a sequel. But in Devilman Saga, they do another interesting thing with the demons, where the demons, the way that you become demons or devilmen is you put on this demon armor that possesses the soul of the demon, which I think is really interesting. And the demon armor looks very, specifically the demon armor for Ammon does share a lot of similarities with the armor that Ammon wore in Devilman Demon Knight, which is the canon prequel, which would also be pretty good to get a release over here. I have my gripes with Demon Knight. I don't like exactly how it depicts Ammon's backstory, because I frankly think that every adaptation they've done of Ammon's backstory has been disappointing. But I do still think Devilman Demon Knight should get released here too, since it is part of the canon. But Devilman Saga and Devilman Lady I do think take priority over that, just because I think they're much more important to the story, because they continue on after the end of Devilman. Alright, number 4, Abashiri Family. Now this is one that I've watched the OVAs, and I've skimmed through bits and pieces of the manga. I actually own the manga in its entirety, however it's completely in Japanese, so I can't actually read it without, like, using Google Translate or something. And like I said, when I reviewed Violence Jack, I got very mixed results when I did that, so we'll see if I decide to go through with that at some point. But Abashiri Family is another very influential Go Nagai work. It introduced us to many mainstay characters that would later become staples, such as Naojiro, Damon, and then the kid whose name I forget his original name. I always forget that kid's name for some reason. But Damon would later become Dante in Cutie Honey, and then the youngest one would become Junpei. And then Naojiro would become Naoko in the Cutie Honey manga, and Naojiro Hayami in the anime. But Naojiro has appeared in many, many Go Nagai works. He appears in like a third of Go Nagai stuff that he makes. Like, he's in almost everything. He's a very prominent Go Nagai character, and Abashiri Family was where he was created and where he got his start. The Abashiri Family follows the story of a crime family known as the Abashiri Family, who are like the most dangerous and notorious crime family in the world. It also has to deal with Kikinosuke, the oldest Abashiri child, who is revealed to be a girl, who was raised as a boy until her 16th birthday. She goes off to school to live a normal life, and again, the school is very similar to that of Keiko Kamen, where the teachers are all like corrupt and want to torture the students and do all this terrible shit. And they have to fight the teachers and stuff. And then later on, the Abashiri family comes to the school and all team up to defeat the teachers and principal and stuff. But that's just one arc of it. I actually don't know what part of the manga that would be in because I haven't got to it yet. But that is what the OVAs are based on. And the OVAs have had a VHS release. I think they should get an actual DVD release, though, or a Blu-ray. They only have been released on VHS, and the VHS is super rare. Of course I own it, but it is rare. Alright, moving on to number 3, we have Susano-oh, or Susano, which is Go Nagai's take on the Susano legend, and it's about this kid who gets, like, psychic powers, and allows him to become this, like, dark being called King Dread, and there's a bunch of, like, stuff with, like, psychic, you know, telekinetic battles where they're, like, picking up shit and throwing it at each other, and using, like, their psychic powers against each other. I haven't actually finished it. I've read like 30 or 40 chapters of it, but I haven't actually finished it, and I lost my place because my phone that had the manga app on it died, so I didn't get a chance to finish it, so I'm probably just going to have to start over. But yeah, he joins a psychic club at school that's all just a bunch of fake psychics, and he's the real psychic. And there's actually a lot of similarities I found when I was watching Mob Psycho 100 to Susano, although Susano is considerably better in my opinion, and Susano's not as comedic as like Mob Psycho 100. But Susano's never had an anime adaptation, but it has had a video game adaptation. But the manga itself's pretty entertaining, and I'd love for it to get a US release. It's one of the ones that I've enjoyed the most. It does also cross over with Violence Jack at one point later on in Violence Jack. Not in Susano, but in Violence Jack. Susano characters appear in the Hyper Grappler arc, which is pretty cool. Alright, number 2, we have one of the big 3, Mazinger Z. For whatever reason, Mazinger Z is the only one of Go Nagai's big 3 manga that has never been released in English. Mazinger Z is the granddaddy of all super robots, right? It literally defined the genre of what mecha would become. Mazinger Z was the first anime and manga to contain a robot that is piloted from a cockpit. Prior to this, we only had examples like Astro Boy, who was just, you know, human-sized, and sentient, and we had Gigantor or Tetsujin 28, who was literally just remote-controlled. Mazinger Z defined what mecha would become by having the robots be piloted from the inside. It's also fantastic, and for whatever reason, the manga has never been released in the US. And the manga does have a weird thing where there's actually 2 different versions of the manga, and they diverge in the later parts. I think the original version of the manga is better, the one that had, like, Anko Kuji and was much darker. Whereas the later version of the manga, which diverges and follows the anime path, is a lot more lighthearted and has, you know, is based on the anime. But the strange thing is, the anime version of the manga, the one that was based on the anime, is actually the canon version if we go on the events of Great Mazinger, which is based on that. So in the Great Mazinger continuity, the events of the anime are more canon than the events of the original manga, and then Grendizer follows up after Great Mazinger. Obviously, there's other different sequels and spin-offs as well, like Maz and Kaiser. With Mazinger Z, the original, I do think the original manga should get released here first, because I find that to be the best version of the manga. because it had, like I said, Anko-Kuji. It was much darker. It had that really cool ghost mech arc with Baron Ashura at the hot spring. And I've read as much of the Mazinger Z manga as I could find, and I did do a review of it on the channel back in the past. For reference, I also did review the Demon Lord Dante anime, and I reviewed the Dora Ron and Maccoon OVA, and with the Demon Prince Enma OVA and the Dora Ron and Maccoon Mara remake. I reviewed both of those animes as well, and I did review Devilman Lady, but I have not yet reviewed Devilman Saga. And I've also reviewed the #1 pick, which we'll get to in a minute here, both the anime and manga. But speaking of, let's just jump into that #1, yeah? So at #1, this is going to be shocking to absolutely no one who pays attention to me, but at #1 we have Violence Jack. Now, Violence Jack is my favorite of the Devilman sequels. It is not considered a canon sequel, but it is definitely a sequel. We've established that many times here on the channel. I've had arguments with people who later actually came to agree with me, so obviously Violence Jack is pretty great. It's like Fist of the North Star, but it was made before Fist of the North Star, because it's an apocalyptic wasteland with this big buff guy walking around protecting the innocent. There's a lot of differences there, because Jack is a very different character than Kenshiro. Jack is a lot more, like, cold and, brutal, because he doesn't believe in defending the weak. He believes in strengthening the weak so they can fight their own battles. And, like, when people get taken hostage, he'll just literally kill them and say, ha, now you don't have a hostage. So very different character than Kenshiro. But Violence Jack ties in with, like, every major Go Nagai manga. Like, you have characters from various different series that appear in different arcs of it. And I absolutely love just how off the walls and insane it gets with doing that. But the manga has never been released in English. We did get the 3 OVA trilogy re-released over here by Discotek, as well as being released over here by Manga Entertainment in the past. But I do think that the manga itself needs that omnibus treatment that Devilman got with the Classic Collection and Cutie Honey got with the Classic Collection. I think they should release it in 6 big Classic Collection volumes, compiling all of Violence Jack. I think that would be sufficient to fit them all. But yeah, Violence Jack, very big inspiration, I feel, to things like Fist of the North Star and Berserk. So I think that Violence Jack definitely needs a US release, because it was a pioneer in post-apocalyptic manga, and I think that that's a big thing for it. And I just hate how underappreciated it gets, because Violence Jack, in my opinion, is one of Go Nagai's best. It's an absolute classic, and it's, like I said, a pioneer in post-apocalyptic anime and manga. But, yeah, that's my top 10 Go Nagai mangas that I think should be licensed over here in the US, either by 7 Seas or whoever. With these different series, there was a few others that could have made this list. I almost put Shootin' Doji on here, but it ultimately got pushed off by some of the others. I also do think some of the sequels should come out here, you know, like Great Mazinger and Grendizer, but I do think that Mazinger Z should take precedent over that. And I think that, you know, basically I'd love it if every Go Nagai manga got released in the US, but these are the top 10 that I think need to be as priority. But anyway, that's all I really have to say for today. I hope you enjoyed. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. Have a good one. Toodles.
Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true, it's true. Hey, think Dike, kid. You people have to be honored to have a man of intensity, integrity, and intelligence among you.